Okay. Um, so thank you, everyone. We might kick today's lecture off. It's 10 past. The quiz probably has ended. I'm not sure whether my timing is exactly right, but hopefully almost everyone has done it. I've just, while you're doing it, I realised that I could have a look at the gradebook on Canvas and see the marks appearing live as people submitted it. And it looks like almost everyone has done it. There's a few people who didn't attempt it for one reason or another. Hopefully it wasn't because they got the messaging wrong, didn't realise it was on or whatever. I'll later tonight or tomorrow at some point, I will go through and post on Ed a very quick summary of kind of the spread of marks and things, so you can kind of see how you went, things like that. I can see, just looking at it now, there's a kind of a reasonable spread of marks. I don't think I can see anyone who got 0. I can see lots of people who got 1, 1.5, 2, and some people who got 2.5. So it's a reasonably good spread. Keep in mind that there's 12 of these. This one, you could almost treat this one as a practice run, just so you can get a feel for how it is. Unless you got 2.5, and I'm sure you won't count it as a practice run. But only your 8 best quizzes count. So even if you only got, a half a mark or 1 mark, 1.5 marks, now that isn't necessarily a problem, because you can do much better in 8 of the others. So you can throw away your worst marks. I can see someone saying, I thought we have 10 minutes. The quiz is open for 10 minutes, but if you read the instructions that were provided both on Canvas and the comments I made on Ed, you have 5 minutes for the quiz. But it's open for 10. That's so that you've got time, people have got time to log in and, things like that. And particularly where time was slow. If you have problems where it crashes or anything like that, make sure you do a screen grab and then email me. And this is the other reason why I have made sure that, we count 8 of your best 12, so that if there are significant problems, on any particular night, or you can't make it for one night, or your power goes out and you don't have an internet connection or something, you still have plenty of others. So that's kind of where we're going tonight. Let me move my Zoom windows out of the way so I can see my screen. This will be the pattern every week from now on. There'll be a quiz. I normally won't say as much at the end of the quiz, so the lecture will really start at kind of 10 past. As soon as the quiz finishes, I'll then spend 45 or 50 minutes talking about the particular topic. Then we'll have a short break, and then we'll have a guest presenter, and then whatever admin at the end to kind of talk about things. And so there's some things I'll talk about at the end of tonight, like whether or not GatherTown is working or not, etc., and the group formation and a few other reminders. Almost every week there'll be, I'll have a whole lot of slides. Most of the time I probably won't have time to talk through all of them, and so I will. You should go through the slides yourself to make sure you understand them. I'll use them more as a guide for kind of key things that I'm going to talk about, but you should make sure you go through and understand the content as well. So tonight, I want to talk about issues around human resources and talent and consulting and team structures, and basically the human side of IT. And Felipe Jara, who's going to come in, will kind of focus on that same area as well. There's a great quote by someone called Donald Knuth. If you don't know who Donald Knuth is, go and look him up. He's a very well-known name in the computing industry. And he kind of talked a lot about the role of people in computing, and in particular that individuals can often do fantastic things, but when you are talking about big complex projects, what really matters is the way in which people work together, the way in which you combine the pieces that different people do. And computing is, to a very large extent, a very human discipline. There was a quote that I put up last week about computing is no more about coding than astronomy is about telescopes. The computer and coding are just tools. It's really about what you do with those. So let me talk about the things I'm going to refer to today. Just a quick comment on terminology. I want to distinguish between IT human resources and HR departments and things like that, which is really kind of about that kind of management bit, and IT talent. And it's that, and that's the kind of capabilities that exist. And increasingly you'll see references in companies to talent and capability management or departments or that sort of terminology rather than HR, because it really is very much about how you manage people. So the first half of, or the next 20 minutes or so, I want to talk about IT talent, in other words, you, and how you kind of fit into this picture. The second half of the next hour or the next 50 minutes, I'm going to talk about other people, in particular users and customers and clients, and how you kind of manage that. But in terms of you, in other words, people working in IT, there's a kind of a really interesting question about how you source IT and where that comes from. This is important because you're working in the industry. You need to know what people are looking for and how you end up with a job. A lot of companies, when they're trying to source IT talent, will hire recruitment companies or try direct recruitment, etc., etc. There's lots of different models. They'll make permanent job offers or take on contract staff, or they'll outsource to consulting companies. There's an incredible diversity of kind of models around how talent and capability is managed and leveraged and sourced and found, etc. And one of the key things is about finding out all those sorts of things. So the reasons why it's kind of difficult is largely because of understanding what you're looking for, and that then feeds into how you differentiate yourself. What makes you different from everyone else, and what will get you a kind of a key job. I don't want to fill out this table. Think about the kind of challenges that exist in the industry in terms of finding people with good computing skills, the steps companies might take to overcome them, and then what that tells you about how you kind of are likely to maximise the opportunities that exist for you. So, for example, pace of change in the industry is really quick. That means skills become out of date really quick, become out of date very quickly, and often recruiters aren't aware of that. So companies will often, think about what companies might do in that regard, and how you demonstrate to them that you're able to learn new skills quickly. So that kind of self-learning, being able to show that you can adapt, etc. One of probably the single most key challenge on that table is that second one that I've bolded, where it says that technical people need to know how the business works. When you talk to recruiters, project leads, things like that, a key challenge is the ability of technical people to understand customers and clients and the operations of the business. That is so much the time a key element, and that's to a large extent what this subject spends a lot of time focusing on, understanding the role of IT, but not understanding the technical elements, understanding the role it plays within a business. And in order to do that, you need to know how businesses work. Lots of strategies. So once you've got people there, then it raises the question of how you manage IT talent. So lots of strategies for that, performance management, leadership development, etc. So if I look at a survey that was done by Deloitte, it talked about the kind of the elements that attract and retain staff, and there were kind of a number of kind of key ones in that. Differentiation of compensation based on performance. People do well, pay them more. That'll often attract people. Providing people with opportunities to develop, and to do that, you need to coach them and mentor them. That attracts people. Offering career flexibility. That will attract people. So they're kind of three key ones that this Deloitte survey did. Have a think about what matters to you. Here's a table that kind of gives the full list from that survey. And so you can kind of see the patterns. The top three that I just mentioned are at the top of that list. But there's a whole bunch of others as well. It's interesting that there are regional differences, probably associated with cultural variations. In some areas, certain things are valued more highly. In others, you can see, for example, about a bit over halfway down the list, there's formalised job rotation programs. That's a much more significant factor in Asia Pacific than it is, for example, in Europe, for whatever reason. But even if you ignore the size of those bars and look down that list on the left, which of those things matter to you? If you're going to work in this industry, one of the key things is working out what you're looking for. And this will kind of give you a starting point to think through some of these elements. So, let me move on, talk about something different for a moment. And that's just as as an aside, this is particularly relevant at the moment, but managing talent in a recovery. It's very easy, it's not very easy, it's very hard to attract good talent. It's even harder to attract good talent and manage it and provide people with good pathways and, et cetera, when companies are in, have a real kind of challenge. A lot of the data around this emerged out of the previous global recession. I went looking for this slide earlier. I went looking for data, similar data around the last 12 to 18 months because of COVID. Last 12 months because of COVID. Couldn't find anything yet, but I'm sure that there will be an emergence of studies about how companies have recovered as a result of the challenges of COVID, and in particular, how they managed people. One of the consequences of COVID is a lot of companies have struggled, a lot of companies have put people off. Some companies, because of the nature of those companies, have been very successful. I'm sure Zoom, for example, has done incredibly well out of the last 12 months. But that creates a very volatile environment. And so there's been kind of interesting studies that talk about how you manage people in that sort of environment, that sort of situation. I just wanted to run through those things very quickly. But before I kind of leave that, a really kind of crucial element in this is to think about what those elements mean for you. So I'm not going to try and get you to answer this for me now or in a poll or on a Menti poll or anything like that. But you should be able to answer, think about how many hours you have spent planning your career over the last 12 months. So if you think back over the last 12 months, how often and how much time have you spent thinking about where your career is going? I suspect you've done it at least a little bit because you've chosen to do a master's degree. Most of you are in a master's, some of you are in a grad dip, but postgraduate qualification. So the fact that you're enrolled in this course and you're here listening to me now means that you've probably done at least a little bit of thinking in this space. But the question is how much of that and how structured has it been and in what forms? Have you done a self-assessment? Have you said, well, I can't get a job at the moment. Maybe I should go and do some more study. Oh, the MIT looks interesting. Or did you say, well, I've got really good skills in these areas, but I'm lacking in these areas, and therefore, in other words, a self-assessment, and then said, well, okay, how am I going to address those gaps, etc. So where in those circle of 5 points that are on that diagram, where have you spent time? What have you done in each of those? And in particular, do you know what you want to do in 2 years' time or 5 years' time? What are your strengths? What are your opportunities? Andrea, one of our tutors, who's also absolutely fantastic, kept harassing me when we were co-teaching another unit last semester. Whenever I use the word weakness, she said, they're not weaknesses, they're opportunities for development. So look at your strengths and areas for potential for development. Have you identified those? That was just a very quick piece about kind of your role to get you thinking about how you fit into the picture. Most of the, for the next half an hour, sorry, not most, all of the next half an hour, I really want to talk about an area called change management and variations of that. And that kind of feeds into this area of projects and people and the relationship between them and how they interact and affect each other. And kind of managing projects and kind of looking at how you handle that won't let you retain people, support companies, etc. It's the way in which you engage with people that does that. So let me talk about briefly what I mean by change management. So firstly, just on a project level, it's essentially change management is a structured process and a set of tools for leading the people's side of change to a desired outcome. So in other words, we are trying to work out how we take a set of tools and in using those, lead people through some sort of process. At an organisational level, it's much broader. So you're trying to kind of transform an organisation. Both of those are elements that you should kind of develop a really good understanding of. Let me show you what I mean. Kind of key element, if you don't think about the kind of single biggest roadblock to the success of most projects, I'll talk about some things and contradict this a little bit later on, but not really. You'll see what I mean shortly. But the single biggest obstacle to success for major change projects is people not wanting to change. You know, people saying, "What's wrong with the way we do it now? Why do we have to change?" That's just a whole lot of work. Everything's working at the moment. So it's that kind of employee or user or customer resistance, and then not managing that resistance well. So that's that second part, the ineffective management of the people side of change. So the single biggest thing that derails most change projects or stops them from being as successful as they should be is people. People saying, "I don't want to change. I don't know how to change. I don't like this new way of doing things." That's kind of where I want to talk about that change management. So let me kind of differentiate. A lot of you will hopefully have some understanding of project management. That's not what we're talking about here. The distinction between project management and change management, they're related, but essentially project management is that kind of technical side. It's how do we manage this project? How do we identify a need, design a solution, develop it, deliver it, build the technology, roll it out, etc. Change management is how we ensure that that change is adopted, embraced, used, that people don't fight it, etc. So project management is really the technical side of moving from a current state to some future state. So that's project management. Change management is the people side of that. How do you get people to go from doing things the way they are at the moment to the way that they could be doing it in the future, moving from that current state to the future state? Those two things are complementary. They have a common objective, success. We want success. We want to get value out of this. We want to be doing something better than we're doing at the moment. We want it to be more effective, more efficient, better run, higher profits, whatever it is. There's indicators of success, and both project management and change management are about getting from current to future, but they deal with different sides of that. And so it's rarely project management that derails a project. It's much more commonly that change management aspect. So how do you do it? How do you make sure it's a success? Well, the first element is to recognise the change is a process. You know where you are today. You need to then work out where you want to be. You want to go from one state to another state, from the current state to some future state. The challenges in the current state, I'm using employees as a general placeholder here because we're talking about the transformation of a company. But in some cases, it won't be employees, it may be users, it may be clients, it may be customers. It depends on the nature of the system we're talking about. But if we talk about, take for example, what's a good example? The University of Sydney, where I work, and you're studying, has just very recently put in place a new an HR system, for staff to manage their pay and their leave requests and all those sorts of things. They're just a fairly standard HR system. The university has transitioned from their old, rather out-of-date system to a new one, and that transition has only occurred in the last 6 weeks or so. Previous one, if you went and talked to a lot of staff last year and said, how's the HR system? They'll probably say, oh, yeah, it's kind of got some problems. It's always a bit hard, this thing, it never worked well, or etc. But I'm used to it, and it's I'm comfortable with it. I've over the last, I've been working here for 10 years. I've got to know this one, and I'm now comfortable with it. And so they prefer that, and they don't want to change. And so they will often resist that change. Once you then start rolling it out, the University of Sydney is probably in that transition state with its HR system at the moment. There's a lot of people who are saying, oh, I used to know how to put in a request for a day off work. I want to have a holiday in June after all my exams, or July after my exams are marked. I can't work out how to do it in this new system. I'm all stressed. I'm anxious. I can't work it out. I can't find my pay slip. I don't know if I've got paid properly. Oh, I used to know how to do this, and I don't know how to do it now. And so it creates a lot of disruption. And they don't know what that future state is going to look like. So it's either unknown or not well understood. And so people, don't see the benefit of change. And each of those three things, that stress about how am I going to learn to use this new system? How am I going to make the transition? Am I going to have to learn new things? And then the knowledge about the future state. Well, I don't know what this new system is. Why on earth do I want it? What's wrong with the current one? It does everything I need. So each of those creates a block, and therefore people kind of resist it. You kind of see that across a range of areas when you move from, and you see that transition occurring from a current state to a future state. So often that will mean moving from an ad hoc process to a documented and managed process, but that means people will often say, oh, hang on, that means I can't do things how I want to do them anymore. You go from so often that transition will mean a change in your processes. Sometimes it'll mean a change in the operating model. Sometimes it'll mean a change in the types of roles that people have to fill. So you might be putting in place a new call center. So rather than having, the university might move from having student advisors in the faculty, or in each school, or in each department, or associated with each program. And the university might say, well, that's good. It gives, kind of good advice, and people like it because they become experts in, something. And the university might say, well, yes, but that means that they're kind of answering questions only some of the time, and the rest of the time they're sitting around not doing anything. Whereas if we move them into a call center, we can get better efficiencies. And that means they can become specialists in the call center, or vice versa. You can go from changing the way in which people interact with you, from calling up, calling on the phone, to submitting a request through a website. You can have transitions that go from multiple companies that do things in different ways to a merged organisation. So all of those are the types of transitions that occur, and every one of those comes with change that will often be scary, problematic, and people will often resist it. And you can see lots of examples of where that's occurred, and the technology will often drive that. Why does this matter to you? If you're an IT professional, you're just building the system. If you're building a new HR system, you're rolling out a CRM tool, you're building a web system to manage customer inquiries. Or either you're building it or you're in a consulting company that's doing it for another organisation. So, as an IT professional, why on earth does that matter to you? Partly because, as I said before, if you don't know how businesses work, you won't be nearly as effective. And because if you don't understand the way in which an IT system is going to be implemented in an organisation, and the way in which it's going to transform that organisation, and the way in which people respond to that transformation, then the application will be a disaster. By understanding your customers or employees or users of your system better, and the impacts they're going to face, you're going to be able to build better solutions. You're going to be able to decide how it rolls out more effectively, how to kind of manage that, what sort of communication needs to occur. The better you can do that, the more effective you're going to be as an IT professional. And it means that you go from being an order taker, and by that I mean someone who gets told, we need a system to do X, can you please build it? Where you are basically just building something that someone has told you to do, that they need, to being a strategic partner of the business, to being engaged in the way in which the business operates, because you're seeing how the IT components fit within the kind of organisational structures. So that kind of, if I go from there to a question about who does change management, the short answer is everyone. If you look at that, you get kind of executives and senior managers who might kind of determine the strategic directions, mid-level managers and supervisors who understand how this kind of fits into it and manage to do the project management bit, but also need to understand that change management element. You get project teams. All of those kind of contribute to this. And the reason they're shown as cogs there, that we're kind of all interlinked, is because if they're not connected, if they're not working together coherently, everything falls apart. It doesn't work. And that's kind of why no matter where you sit in that structure, you need to understand these elements. You get people who kind of are employee facing, executives and senior leaders and middle level managers and supervisors. They need to kind of understand how people are going to respond. It depends on where they fit in the structure, depends upon whether that's the IT people or the users of the system being rolled out. And then you get people who are enablers. So a project team may not be, as an IT person, you may not be, if you were rolling out a new HR system in an organisation or responsible for discussions around it, you may not be working directly with employees and, etc. But that doesn't mean you can't be oblivious of the way in which they're going to respond to the technology. Let me jump that one. So in terms of why this is important, hopefully that's already become clear, but let me give you kind of three perspectives to think about in terms of the impacts this has at an organisational level. One, connecting change management to business roles, two, mitigating negative consequences, and three, translating change management to financial performance. I want to talk about each of those briefly. So in terms of organisational change management and connecting that to business results, think about the relationships between each of these four things on that table. The project, and what is it? what is it we're actually doing? Then that kind of connects through to this purpose. Why are we changing? What's the purpose of this project? What is the kind of intended purpose of it? And that's kind of the value that this will have. Once you know that, you can kind of see what that says about what we're changing. That not what we're changing in an IT sense, but what we're changing in the sense of how people will operate, how they'll function, how the organisation will work. And from there, you can say, well, what does that mean about the roles that people will be doing? Because if people don't change how they do their job, then it doesn't matter what you do in terms of those first three elements. It won't work. If people don't change how they do their job, then ultimately that means you won't achieve that intended purpose, and the project will be a failure. It doesn't matter what you do with a project if people don't change ultimately. Negative consequences. This kind of diagram, which is called the prosody flight risk model, is kind of intended to show what can happen if things go wrong. So earlier on I talked about kind of people going through that transition. They kind of go from what they're doing now to what they're doing in the future. And that creates tension and uncertainty and dissatisfaction until things start to improve. So if I take this new human resources system that I talked about at the university, I talked about it before. Last year people were saying, I'm using the old system and it works. I can kind of do what I want. It might be inefficient and I might, it might be clunky and it might not. Might mean that to do things that, I don't get good reports out of it. I can't tell what, for whatever reason it looks dated. It's difficult to use. But I'm kind of comfortable with it. And now we're moving to a new system, Workday, in the university. And at the point we're in at the moment, we're seeing people saying, oh, I don't know how to do this. I can't work it out. I had to spend an hour on the phone, sitting on the phone waiting to talk to someone in the service centre to explain to me how I cancel the leave that I accidentally booked in. And I'm really frustrated and annoyed and scared and etc. In a year's time, hopefully I'll be saying, oh, actually, I've kind of got used to this new system. It works now and I'm happy with it. I've probably forgotten that I ever complained about it and I'm happy again. So that's kind of people going through from, if you think of that, this diagram in front of you, the green, yellow, red. Green is kind of happy, yellow is, I'm a bit concerned, red is I'm just really angry and annoyed and frustrated and etc. Any IT system will cause tension. So any IT system will have people going from moderately happy to being a little bit unhappy, and then hopefully going back to being happy with the new system again. And so when they're unhappy, you get productivity loss, people are dissatisfied, they're resisting it, etc. And so you want to kind of get them out of that yellow zone, back up to the green one as quickly as you can. If they get too unhappy, down into that red zone, then people will just say, this company is terrible. They just can't, I can't do what I want to do. I don't like this system. It's too hard to use. Or you'll lose employees. You'll have an impact on customers because it depends on whether the system is customer facing. But even if it's not, if you've got unhappy employees, it impacts on customers. You'll get active resistance. Instead of people just grumbling about it and not using it properly, they'll start to push back. They'll just say, I'm not changing. This is terrible. I'm not going to use it, etc. And so when you can get down into that red zone and not get out of it. So the kind of a question is, how do you manage your project to get back up in that green zone as quickly as possible? And then the final thing that I wanted to talk about, those three elements, and that is, how do you translate organisational change management to financial performance? So that flight risk model on the previous slide, talked about, the cost avoidance, productivity loss and turnover, etc. But what does that mean in terms of the return of on investment? I kind of hinted at this in that flight risk model, but they're kind of about speed of adoption. You want to get back up out of the yellow zone and red zone as quickly as you want. You want to get come up as far into the green zone as you can, so you get as many people as possible utilising it. So you want to look at kind of where you end up. If I actually go back a slide, you can see you don't want a situation where you come down to the red and stay there. You don't want a situation where you come down into the yellow and stay there. Where you end up, what's the ultimate utilisation? And are people kind of performing at the level that you wanted to expect it out of that? And so if you look at this from a financial perspective about rolling out a project, think of this, for example, as a timeline and the cost of this HR project at the university. Obviously, at the start, you're spending a lot of money implementing it. And so you get a negative cash flow. Money's going out. You might also lose money because for a little while you might lose some customers. You might be implementing something where you know that it's going to make some people unhappy and they'll leave, but ultimately it'll provide benefits that will attract more people than you lose. So you might get initial losses because of that. So your net cash flow might be negative because of the project, the cost of the project directly, or the indirect costs to your business. At some point, the project will go live, and hopefully you'll then start to see improvements. You'll see a positive outcome because you're saving money, because you're doing something more effectively, efficiently, or whatever. So you're getting business value out of it. So that might be what you'd like to see and what the business case around this says. So it sort of says after a certain amount of time, you'll be ahead. If you get a poorly managed project, that can happen. It starts off costing you what you thought it would, but then after a while, you actually might start losing more money than you expected because people are more unhappy than you anticipated because you didn't manage it well, and ultimately you might not be have implemented it as well, and so even right at the end, you're not making as much because you're not getting the outcomes that you wanted. And so you need to look not only at that final figure, the difference between the vertical bars at the end, you also need to look at that cumulative difference, because that's what it effectively is costing you if you've managed it poorly. You've not just lost this bit at the end, you've lost all those bits in between. And so you kind of need to factor that in terms of how you're managing this. There's a whole bunch so let me talk about how you might understand some of this. How do you kind of develop and manage this effectively? There's a whole raft of organizational change management models that give ideas around how you manage this, that kind of let someone who's trying to take this into account. You might not ever use these models directly, but it's useful to know about them because it'll help you understand more about how IT projects should be managed and therefore your role in them. You get some models that focus on the business impacts. How has this changed? How is this new HR system? How is this new CRM system? Or anything else for that matter, what's its business impact? How is it changing our business? And so there's something called the McKinsey 7S model that focuses on that. And I'll look at one or two of these in a little bit more detail in a moment. Some of these OCM models focus on the relationship between the business and people. How do they kind of relate to each other? And the ADCAR model does that. There are ones that focus more on employee responses and needs. How we're rolling out a new HR system. How are the employees of the company going to respond to this? The Cotter model and the Kubler-Ross model both kind of emphasize that area. And then there are models that sort of emphasize the sequencing of this, how that kind of fits together. And the Lewin model does that. Some of these models are very participatory. Participatory models are where you seek input from users and take that into account. In other words, you're getting users to participate in it by seeking their input. You get co-design models where you have an emphasis rather on seeking the input of users. You actually actively involve them in the process. So if you're rolling out an HR system, you get employees to become involved in that process in some way, not just in terms of providing input, but being actively involved in the project. There's 3 links there that give a whole lot more of these, but let me look at a couple of them just briefly. So I mentioned ADKAR, ADKAR, that stands for Awareness, Desire, Knowledge, Ability, Reinforcement. And each of those, I'll jump over this fairly quickly because we're going to run out of time. Each of those talk about elements, things that you need to take into account or address in order to manage change successfully. So awareness, you need to be aware of the need for change and the nature of that change. Not only do you need to be aware of it, but the people who are going to have to cope with that change need to be aware of it. So if you were applying this to the rollout of a new HR, if you were a consultant working for a major consulting company and the university brought you in to help manage the rollout of its new HR IT system, if you're applying this model, the first step, that awareness bit says, well, how do we actually ensure that the employees in your company can see why there is that need for change and what the nature of that change is? How do we help them understand that the existing system isn't working as effectively? How can we help them understand what this is going to look like for them? And likewise, for these other elements, if I pick ability, how do you ensure that you have the ability to implement the change and demonstrate that the improved outcomes that you're going to get from it? And so let me jump over that. Different people will go through that in different stages, and so not every person can change at the same rate. So one of the things that ACAR does is kind of say, how do we sequence these things so that people can move along this process, at a rate that kind of works for them? You get early adopters. Person D might change and become comfortable with this change more quickly. Person C and F might take a little longer. So you get those elements. Just very quickly, so I would encourage you to go and have a look at these models, studying them a little bit more, just to kind of see what they can contribute to you in terms of your understanding of how you manage IT, the change associated with IT projects. I mentioned Cotter as well. This one kind of, as I said back here, Cotter and the Kubler-Ross one really focus on the employee responses to change. So if I go back and look at this, it says, in terms of managing this change, you create a climate for change. You need to increase the urgency, get people to realise that, oh, hang on, this existing system isn't working. We need something better. You need to kind of get a vision right. What's this new, where are we going? What's this new system going to look like? Etc. So I won't go through all the stages, but it's about how you create an environment where people want to change, create a climate for that change, are willing to accept it. Then you engage the whole organisation in that change so that people kind of know that it's happening and are excited about it, or at least willing to accept it. And then you roll it out and sustain it. So that's kind of this process and why change is important. Well, hopefully after the break, Felipe Jara, who works for the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, I'll introduce him shortly, but he's going to hopefully tell us a little bit about his role within these companies, and you should be able to get a sense of what these elements mean and how they kind of feed into that. So I've been talking non-stop for about the last 45 minutes. Why don't we take 10 minutes? Let me give my voice a break. So we'll pause for 10 minutes, go and stretch your legs or get a drink. And then after the break, I'll introduce you to Felipe. So maybe we can kick things off, Felipe.
Sure.
So everyone should be listening. They've probably been fascinated by us chatting, but or they've been off stretching their legs and they've just arrived back. So everyone, can I welcome Felipe Jara? Felipe is currently, unless it's changed in the last little while, a senior strategy manager at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. He also previously spent time in various other companies. I know you were at a consultant for KPMG for a little while, probably working on projects not too dissimilar to the ones that are going to be the focus of the students' project in this subject. Well, just for information, Felipe, their group project for the semester, working in groups of 4, is they have to identify an organisation. It can be one that they work in or something else. They then have to identify a technology that is either new or at least new to that organisation, and then explore the benefits that could bring and how it might transform elements of the organisation, work practices, workflows, whatever, and the risks that might come with that. So they kind of have to look at that kind of transformation process. So everyone, that's Felipe. As you probably heard us saying a moment ago, he's also a graduate of the Master of IT, the degree that many of you are enrolled in from about 10 years ago. And so he's a fantastic example of, if you do really well in this course, which Felipe did, the sorts of work that you can kind of evolve into. Felipe, I might hand over to you.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. And nice to not see you, but I guess feel you on the Zoom chat. So yeah, I was chatting before with Andrew and David. I was graduated from this class probably 10 years ago. I did the Masters of IT Management. A bit of background about myself. So I did, like, my first undergrad was really into the technical side of things. A lot of focus onto networking and IT and coding and all of that. But after 2 or 3 years in the industry, I decided to do a bit of a change, as probably many of you are doing right now. Did the Master of IT Management, and that kind of gave me like the kickstart into my new career that started with consulting, but now has progressed more into the sort of areas of project and portfolio management at the Commonwealth Bank, as well as general strategy. So I'll just gonna start. Let me see when you can see my screen. I don't use Zoom at the office, so bear with me for a sec.
Yep.
Can you see the screen now? Perfect. Good. So the topic for tonight is outsourcing in 40 minutes or less. We're speaking with David and Andrew and trying to think why it's important for you guys to know about outsourcing. And I think looking about the course, professional management and IT, there's no way you're never going to come across outsourcing, right? Outsourcing, it's one of the core principles about providing IT services or the way how IT is structured in today's companies, right? You can be doing any sort of work and you're going to be exposed to outsourcing as a concept. It might be a direct impact of the work that you're doing right now in the terms that you might be having to deal with outsourcing providers, or maybe tomorrow you become a manager and you need to start talking about making outsourcing decisions. So the agenda for today, and again, trying to keep it really simple and high level. By the way, feel free to drop questions during the session, though I'm not too sure that I can read them right now, but David will let me know. The agenda for today, I want to cover 3 key things with you. So the first point is about what is outsourcing, why do companies actually outsource, and where is all this coming from? Secondly, I'm going to be talking about 3 key outsourcing models, or the 3 ones that I think are more common in the industry and you're most likely to come across. And lastly, more about a bit of a consulting flavor to this. It's about how do management actually making decisions about outsourcing? What are sort of the things they're thinking through? So outsourcing. Outsourcing is not a new term. It's not a new fad. It's not like a new trend going in the industry. Outsourcing has been there for many, many years, 20, 30, 40 plus years. And it's not just something that's on IT. It's on every single industry. To try to give you an example of what outsourcing is, I just want to start with an example. This is why I have this t-shirt in here. Imagine for a second that today you decide to start your own sort of business to make some money on the side, and you decide to start selling t-shirts, right? You create like t-shirts with really funny slogans like the ones here, like "I'm never wrong." When you first started, probably going to be just yourself. You are going to be like a one-man orchestra, right? You're going to be doing every single thing in your business. You're going to be probably buying the t-shirts from a retailer, coming up with the really funny slogans that you want to print on the t-shirts, printing the t-shirts, putting them into some sort of website, Facebook Marketplace, eBay, Gumtree, selling them to people, shipping them over, and eventually just dealing with some sort of customer support if people got the wrong size and those sort of things, right? That's probably going to be your day one. But as your company grows and it gets with more clients, you started selling from 10 t-shirts a day to 100, you're going to come to this point when you actually need to think about, how do I actually grow my business from a one-person operation or one orchestra man into something bigger? And the way you can do that, it's split between two different areas. You can either hire people, you can hire like a lot of people to help you with your company, or you can outsource. And in a way, you can become like the director. So for being the guy who does everything, you just become one person who directs different people doing the work that you need to do. Outsourcing basically is, and I love definitions, it's basically just paying someone to do a job or activity that you were doing before, right? So you, instead of, I don't know, buying the t-shirts and printing the slogans on it, you just hire someone to do that for you, right? And you can do that in-source, so you can hire that person to be part of your company, or you can pay someone to do it, and they'll do it by themselves and just give you the final outcome, and they don't become your employee. When talking about outsourcing, it's really easy to just drill straight into IT and saying, guys, this outsourcing equals IT equals outsourcing. But in reality, as I said before, outsourcing is a business practice that goes across all different industries. So to give you another idea, let's say that tomorrow you decide to put your own Italian restaurant here in Sydney, right? And you decide to dine in with tables, and you also want to start selling Italian food to people outside there. Thinking about for a second, you own the restaurant, you got the list, you got the cooks, you design the menu, you put all the things together, and now you want to start doing delivery. How do you get about getting people to deliver your pizza to other places? In the past, 20 years ago, the natural answer would be you hire some drivers, you get them your own motorbikes or bicycles, you put them in your own uniforms, and you send them across to do that deliveries for you. But you need to hire all those people, and you need to buy the motorbikes, and then you need to pay for petrol, and then you need to maintain the motorbikes. And if there are any accidents, you're going to be liable for that. Why don't you just go and sign up with Deliveroo, which is going to provide you a service where you're going to be paying a fee for each delivery, but by the mere fact of paying that fee for delivery, you don't need to worry about hiring people, buying motorbikes, giving them uniforms, and all those sort of things. In the case of Deliveroo, me as a restaurant owner, I'm going to be paying Deliveroo a fee per service, which normally I think is $2 or $3 that you normally add up to the cost. Continuing to this example, let's say you of course have a kitchen that normally is cleaned like on a daily basis. But do you really want to hire cleaners for your company just to do a cleaning once a day? Oops, sorry, wrong example. You can actually just hire some people and pay them per hour. Hire a couple of cleaners. You can go into Gumtree, get some really good cleaners. They're going to come to your company. You pay them $20, $25 per hour, and you hire maybe 5 cleaners, and you pay them per hour and by the number of people that come to your office. And lastly, imagine for a second that this all is going really well, and you want to put out your own website where you can offer your pizzas and people can order online directly instead of calling to your office. You need to create a website. What do? Most of you have a background in IT and could say, oh, I can do my own website. I can go into WordPress and all of that. Or more easily, you can pay a web developer, whatever they're charging you right now, and they can do like a one website for you, and you pay them one fee, and they create the website for you. So on this example, I'm exactly outsourcing 3 different services: delivery, creating the website, and cleaning, to 3 different companies or contractors, and I'm using 3 different ways of paying for that particular service. Those are 3 different ways of outsourcing, and we're going to talk more about that later. But coming back to the concept of outsourcing, why would I decide to move a function or activity outside of my business, outside of my control? Why would I hire an external company or person to do a job, a work for me? There are many reasons why companies and people decide to outsource activities to other companies. The first one is that it's cost effective. Normally, and this is probably the reality in 80% of the cases, outsourcing an activity to an external provider tends to be more cost effective, i.e. tends to be cheaper in the long run, right? Many reasons for this, and I'm not going to go into the detail, but basically, going back to the example of Deliveroo, because Deliveroo provides uniforms to like hundreds of people, and they have like a whole system that has already, they can probably offer you the delivery in a really cost-effective way, and the cost per delivery is going to be lower than if you were to hire your own people, pay them like a full day wages, and get your own bikes. The second point why you might want to outsource is because outsourcing allows you to do short-term commitments. Going back to this whole idea about whether you need to hire people to do a job or maybe you paid someone to do the job, outsourcing allows you to do commitment for months, days, weeks, whatever time you need necessary. And you can exit those commitments and you don't need to worry about making people redundant, paying severance packages and all of that. And the last part is that allows you to focus on your core competencies. So going back to the Italian restaurant, the core service or the key business of the Italian restaurant is to sell Italian food, right? It's not really create websites, it's not really do the cleaning, or it's not really doing deliveries. All those sort of things are what you call like non-core activities that you can easily outsource to other people. Of course, whenever you make a decision, there's the good things and there's the bad things. The bad things about outsourcing are what are some of the reasons why people decide not to outsource. The first one is about lack of control. Because you're paying someone to do work for you, a particular task, activity, or process, you no longer are 100% in control of that. You agree on the terms and conditions, you pay the fee, but after that, it's really the provider or this outsourcing person who's going to be doing the activity within their own sort of rules and way of doing things. And you might not like the way they're doing it. The second part, and relates a little bit to the lack of control, is that because now this activity is not under your direct control, there could be communication issues. Maybe you decide to outsource to a company in another country and they don't speak the same language. And maybe, I don't know, there's time difference and it's really hard to get a hold of them. There's some concerns about quality. To give you an example, in the past, when people started to outsource call centers to different countries around the world, there was always this concern about, oh, I don't like this because it's not local and it's less quality. But could be an argument for that. But I think a lot of that is really perception. People tend to think that because you're not doing the task, it's of less quality, whereas in reality, it could be the complete opposite. So those are kind of like the key ideas, the key thoughts of why people decide to outsource. But coming back to the example of the pizzeria or the Italian restaurant, there are many ways of outsourcing an activity to a third party. And today, I'm just going to be talking about the three key ones that I think are more prevalent on today's IT industry. We're going to be talking about managed services. We're going to talk about outsourcing as a project. We're going to be talking about outsourcing by the means of stack augmentation or body shopping, as is known in some places. Let's start with managed services. And Andrea's going to love this one because this is part of another course that Andrea does about service management. Before we talk about what is managed services, we need to understand what really is a service. And to give a perfect example that I've been giving for the last 5 years, let's talk about email, because everyone has an email, right? When you think about the email service, you have two sides of this equation. You have the customer, in this case could be you guys, that you use an email provider, that you basically have some bare requirements about what a good email service is, right? It could be that, oh, I want the email to be 24/7, always available and never goes down. That's a requirement. I want the email to be available in all my devices without restrictions, so I can have it on my phone, on my iPad, and on my 2 computers. And I want to be able to access to a call center, so if there's any issue, I can call someone that can fix it. So you as the customer, you don't really care about how that's been done. You care about what you're getting out of it. You're caring about the outcomes, about your expectations. On the other side of the equation, there's going to be a provider. And in the case of email, it's going to be your IT department, for example, right? These guys need to be focusing about, if I need to provide these sort of outcomes to the customer, what are sort of the key capabilities that I need to build to provide that service? What are some of the technical aspects? What some of the system processes that I need to put forward to deliver the email? So whilst the customer really focus on what am I getting out of this, the provider need to put the focus on how do I get about building those things to get those outcomes. Going back to definitions, because I like to put them there on my slides, a service is a way of delivering value to customers by facilitating some of those outcomes, by the customer not having to own any of the specific costs and risk involved in providing that service. So again, think about the email. As a customer, you focus on what you get. As a provider, focus about how you do it. But the second part of the definition talks about without owning the specific costs and risks and what that actually means. Let's go back to the email. And assuming that all of you have some sort of IT background in here, to be easier, what do you really need to provide email to your customers? You need people and processes, because you need people to be doing things and setting up servers and all of that. So you're going to be doing like a help desk, as I said before, to help the customers. You need to have some architects to design and support the IT service and the IT servers, right? You need applications. You're probably going to have an email server, Office, for example. You're going to have to be able to design mobile apps or some sort of gateways for your mobile apps. You need to be able to design some sort of VDI or VPN in case you have people accessing from another country, and all those sort of things, probably many more applications. And you also need actual assets, infrastructure to host the email service. So you're going to need databases, you're going to need computers, storage, network access, and data sensors to put all of these things together. So the customer doesn't really care about any of those sort of things. But you as a provider need to be thinking about all those sort of things and making sure they're working perfectly so you can provide the email service back to the customer. So that's been the definition of service. And in that case, service email could be provided by your internal IT department, or it could be someone else. When we talk about managed services, the only difference really is that the service provider, it's outside your organization. It's an outsourcing provider, which provide a service to the client. And the client, of course, pays you back for the service, right? And the way they normally pay you in a managed service arrangement is that they pay you per unit. So in the case of the email, you normally charge your client by number of accounts on a particular month. So let's say $7, I think, is the price for Office 365 email today. So you charge your customer, I'm going to charge you $7 per month for each user that you have, which from the point of view of the client is actually pretty good, because imagine that for $7 per account per month, that means that I don't have to worry about any of this. I get all of that ready to go, and I don't have to worry about setting up any of these sort of things. I don't need to worry about hiring any of the people in here to support all these activities and applications, right? So that's part of the benefits. The managed service arrangement, this whole concept of paying fee per unit, allows you to have better cost control because you know your costs upfront. I'm probably going to have some savings. I'm going to assume that $7 per user per month is a pretty cheap price and probably way lower than it will cost you to do that internally. It allows you to scale up and down. And this is a key benefit of managed services. If today you have 20 employees in your company and you need 20 email accounts, that's fine. If tomorrow you acquire a bigger company, you have 200 people working for you, and you need to give email accounts to all of them, you can easily go to the service provider and say, you know what, from tomorrow, I need to scale by 180 email accounts within 1 month. Really easy for them because they have all the capabilities for doing that. If you were to do that internally, that means that you need to go out and buy new servers, new databases, new applications, probably hire more people for your contact center and the likes. The other interesting part, of course, is by doing this, you shift all the risks to the provider. You don't need to worry about servers going down. You don't need to worry about the service desk having issues. You don't need to worry about any sort of security issues having on your email server because there's a provider who actually looking after those sort of things, right? And allows your product to access to the best practices and best services that you could provide internally. The risk that relate really much to the broader outsourcing risk and issues. You lose the control because someone else is doing the service for you, so they're going to do it the way that they normally do it. If you continue with the same provider for many years, you risk about locking into the provider environment. So you use the service so many years, it might actually be really difficult to move away from them. Because it's done by an external party, some of your end users or customers might complain about it and might think like they don't like an external party doing that service for them, and they would prefer that to have someone local. They can just go to the desk, knock on the door, have the thing solved. And lastly, because it's a business, this guy is trying to make money and this guy is trying to save money, there's going to be misalignment about what sort of your objectives are, and there might be some sort of tension in the relationship. Continuing the example of the email and managed services, there are many ways you can outsource email service. You can, for example, how outsourcing started in the 80s. You can, out of all those sort of things, you can decide maybe to just outsource the services, and you can outsource us to another company, even in another country. You might say, well, to deliver an email, I need computers, storage, network, databases. But do I need to own a data center? Do I need to buy a data center? Maybe not. Maybe you just do as many companies do today. You just hire a data center management, and you just hire space in a data center. You might want to go one step ahead and go into cloud computing and say, you know what? I'm not going to own any servers. I'm just going to put everything on the cloud, and someone else is going to do that for me. You might outsource your application development. Or you know what? At the end of the day, you might outsource the whole email service. And going back to the example, go to Google, go to Microsoft, and just pay a fee for the email account, and you don't have to worry about any of this. So that's pretty much managed services, and you're going to hear a lot about this because this is kind of the new trend in outsourcing. And sorry, it's not really new. It's been here for many years, but it's one model that companies are really looking into it more than anything because it gives you that flexibility about paying a fixed fee per service per month and being able to scale up and scale down as needed. The other two outsourcing models are projects. It's pretty straightforward, right? You need to do a project, you need to achieve a particular objective, and instead of doing that in-house with your people, you pay another company for doing that. So what it really means to outsource a project, it means that you engage with an external party as a once-off thing, right? So managed service is normally like an ongoing relationship month to month. Projects is something that you do for one particular outcome, and after that has been done, after a certain period of time, it's completed, that's the end of the relationship. You pay for something. Typical example of projects could be you have your company and you need to create a website. You might just pay a web developer to create your website, and he, after 2 months, delivers the website. That's it, end of it, we shake hands and we part ways. You might like, as a company, you might want to bring an external consultant to help you with a particular problem. The consultant might come in here, deliver what's needed to be delivered, and then after that, you pay him and he leaves. Projects can be charged in two different ways. So one is fixed price. So that's when you say, again, to the developer, I want you to build me a website. And he will come, okay, that's going to be $5,000. Okay, we agree, sign off. Here's your $5,000. Here's my website. Or it could be time and materials, where you can say to the web developer, hey, I want you to build me a website. And he can say, okay, I'm going to charge you $200 per day until I actually finish the work. You can say, sounds good, let's go about it. So you just pay him per day as he continues doing the project. The key thing about about projects that's a bit different of the other two outsourcing models is that projects need a defined objective. You need to define what are you actually trying to achieve. That's why projects normally are done a particular, outcome, so you need to want to deliver, and they're not something that you do on a regular basis for the provider. If that's the case, you might want to just switch to managed services or the other model. And the other model, it's called staff augmentation, or in other parts, it's called also body shopping, because that's what literally you're doing. You go to an outsourcing provider and say, guys, I have some gaps on my workforce. I need to bring more people into my company for a set period of time. So I want you to lend me people from your company so they can come to mine and work for me. So basically, you are expanding your workforce for a limited period of time. You're paying on a per resource per day basis. And the key thing when you do staff augmentation is that unlike projects and managed services, you, as a customer, you are managing these people because these people become just part of your regular teams on workforce. There should be no distinction whatsoever between the people who you brought in for this and the people who are already in your company. It's a really, really good model when what you need is more hands on deck, when you need help for a particular activity going in your company. Because it really allows you to scale up and down quite quickly. why would you go staff augmentation instead of actually hiring more people? Number of reasons. A, if you're trying to apply for a job right now, you might find out that the hiring process could be really lengthy. You need to interview people. They need to apply for your company. You need to reference checks, background checks. You need to accept the offer, serve the notice period in another company, and then they come in and be onboarded. Right? That could take months. Staff augmentation, you can have people in your company in a matter of weeks. The second part is that, particularly in countries like Australia, if you hire people into your workforce, you need to make sure that you have work for them in the long term. You cannot hire them for short periods of time. I mean, there's some ways of doing it, but majorly you only want to bring people into your company that you know are going to be needed for the long haul. If you need just to scale up for 6 months, you might as well just bring people under this model. And lastly, it's because staff augmentation actually allows you to get people who are really skilled, people who do this on a regular basis in other companies. So for example, if you need a mainframe developer, you can go to a provider and get people who are experienced in those sort of things, that they continue working on mainframes all the time, and just bring it to your company, do whatever needs to be done, and then they can go back to their base company. So those are really the three main ways of outsourcing you can see today, and particularly in IT companies. And why I think it's important for you to have a way of being across or being aware of these models is that because today in the IT world, it used to be the case that companies will have big IT departments where they will have everyone on deck and you have everything done in-house, right? So 30 years ago, if you want to have email in your company, you might have your own sort of email team with all your email developers or application managers and contact centers and the likes, right? Today, companies are realizing that it's not always the best case to have everything in-house, and they're looking at managed services, staff augmentation, and running projects depending on the needs of what they need on that particular moment. So to put this into test, I'm just trying to give you like a more concrete example. I have two different situations in here, and I'm going to try to go run you through these scenarios, right? So two key problems, right? So the first one is about feeding a family, have a family of 3. And for us, getting dinner every night, it's always a struggle because both my wife and I work full time. So we need to figure ways of going about how do you actually make dinner every night. And the second part is related about providing IT services to a bank. I work for a bank. I work in the IT department for this particular bank. And there's different ways on you can just go about providing IT services or fulfilling the bank's IT needs. So putting this into context, should have put my animations in here. So I'm going to go from the top. What's really in-house, having everything in-house? In the case of feeding family, it means that my wife and I need to do home cooking every night. In the case of IT services, it might be that you want to have your specialist IT security team in-house. Why? Because those guys are going to be testing all your systems and going to be knowing all the vulnerabilities and all the hacks you can get into it. You probably want to make those guys to be working for you instead of in an external company, just in case. Managed services, where I pay for a particular unit per month. If I'm trying to feed my family, the equivalent of managed service, it's this sort of meal delivery services where you pay on a per meal per week. You sign up on a website and you agree to pay, let's say, $10 per meal per week, and you get a box every month, every week, and with all the meals, and that's perfect. And that continues on and on until you decide to stop. You can also add more meals, reduce the number of meals each week as you see fit without any sort of penalties. In the case of the IT department providing service to the bank, the key example from a managed service could be the email. Again, instead of doing that in-house, you go to Microsoft and you ask them to do that for you, and you pay $7 per account per month. Project-based. Again, what is a project? A project is that something you do once. You know the outcomes, and you pay that for that particular thing, and it's time-bound. So it's start and an end. In the case of feeding the family, I just go and pay for dinner. I go to McDonald's, I go to any restaurants, I go there up front, I choose what I want, and pay for that thing, they cook it for me, they serve it, I eat it, and that's the end of it. There's no ongoing commitment with the restaurant. I can go back to them later on if I want to, or maybe to another one, but that's the end of it. Project-based, maybe you contract another company to build you a payroll system. That's not something you need to do every single day. That's probably something you only need to do once every 10 years. So they come here, they build a system for you, and then that's the end of it. And staff augmentation, this whole idea about you hiring people to be part of your company or family and you mandate what they actually do. In the case of failing my family, it will be if I were to go out and hire a chef that will come to my house every day, and I'll tell the chef today when I eat pasta, tomorrow when I eat pizza, and Wednesday when I eat barbecue. The chef will go there, will buy the ingredients, and will cook the things that I ask him to do. I'll manage what he's doing. In the case of IT service, staff augmentation really will be about, let's hire some designers to do some front end for the website. We just train the designers while we're doing the front end. After that, we can just stop the relationship with them and we just let them know what they need to do. So those are kind of the three key models. And I guess technically it's a fourth because you can always bring things back into your company, or in-housing as it's called, the opposite of outsourcing. But then the question becomes, how do you make the decisions? How do you know whether it's better to cook at your house, deliver service, go out for dinner, or hire a chef? How do you actually make the decisions? Or more importantly, how do your managers or leadership make those decisions? So, bit of a comic, bit of fun. How do you actually make decisions? And it's pretty much like this. Management comes one day and decide, you know what, we review what are we doing right now. We review how much money we're spending in different areas of our business. We decided there might be a better way of doing this, a better way of structuring our company to deliver what we need to do. And the way they normally do this, it's by the ways of doing like some sort of framework or way to structure the thinking. And this, it's a sourcing framework that I used to do when I was in consulting that basically allows you to evaluate every single decision about whether you need to keep something in-house or outsource. And before you make the decisions, you need to ask yourself 4 key questions. The first one, it's about the strategic value, i.e., does making this particular activity bring any value to my company, right? This is a whole discussion about core versus non-core activities. Is this an activity that's core part of my business, or is it something that I need to do and that I can easily pass to someone else who can do it better for me? In the case of the Italian restaurant, again, your core activity is to make Italian food and serve it. Your non-core activity is definitely delivering that to different houses, because guess what? That's not part of being an Italian restaurant, just like an added service on top of that. The second question is about, do you have the internal capabilities or knowledge to deliver this internally, right? So again, do you have enough people for doing this internally, or do you want to have people dedicated to this in your company? And do the people actually know how to do it? Do they know how to do it properly? Can they do it in a different way? Maybe you don't want them to be training on that particular activity. The third point, and this is normally where most decisions are being made, it's about the cost assessment. Given a particular service, and again, going back to the delivery example for your restaurant, you need to do a cost analysis and say, what is best, or what do I get more value per money? Which is a fancy way of doing what is cheaper. Hiring Deliveroo for doing the deliveries for me, or just bring my own people, train them, give them motorcycles, and just pay for everything. And you need to go back which one is better in that case. And the last point, it's all about risk. It's particularly important for financial institutions and government and others. Is there any risk for me to outsource this function to an external party, or is it better to keep it in-house, right? In terms of risk, there's a clear example that might be close to some of you guys. The Department of Immigration in Australia recently has been discussing whether they can outsource some of the assessment they do about every single visa application, because the reality is that they've been swamped by applications over the last couple of years. And they're actually going through the process of about, can we actually outsource this really, I guess, critical activity that deals with a lot of confidential data? Are we happy to outsource this to a third party, knowing that that might mean that some sort of your private data might be disclosed by mistake to another party or other people? And they're going through that sort of assessment right now. The important part to know about this is that sourcing decisions after doing this sort of framework are not set in stone, and I can change over time. And to give an example, I'm just going to talk about my employer, the Commonwealth Bank, which is arguably one of the biggest employers in the IT space right now in Australia. In 2005, under the 2 CEOs ago in CBA went through this massive push about saying, you know what, we have a lot of people in IT, we have a lot of different services and teams. Why don't we look about whether we can outsource some of this to an external party, external provider that in that time was based in India. And in 2005, they did this massive push, this whole assessment about outsourcing and say, let's identify which part of IT we can actually outsource to an external provider without putting ourselves at risk or without losing some of the strategic value of this. And that was 2005, and I wasn't in the Commonwealth, nor even Australia at that time, and that seemed to have worked really well. To reduce their cost, they were able to do some other things, but in 2013, a new CEO, Ian Narev, came over to CBA, and they reviewed the strategy, and they realized they were making some mistakes about outsourcing so much of IT to external parties. And they actually reversed the decision, and they're starting to go in again the framework, the sourcing framework and decision, and decided to start bringing more of those jobs back into CBA, back into Australia, right? And of course, there was a lot of pushback. There were a lot of political reasons about it, keeping jobs in Australia or keeping jobs in the Commonwealth Bank instead of going to another parties and all of that. But there were some really good reasons of why he tried to bring more things inside. There were some quality and risk issues that happened with external providers around this time. And then 4 years after, again, we have a new person coming into the Commonwealth Bank and decides to go the opposite direction again. So in this case, they decide to do a massive outsourcing strategy, particularly around IT security services, which in 2013 were actually brought in-house before. I'm probably not 100% correct in all the details, but you can see that in the span of 12 years, CBA has gone through like a wave of insourcing and outsourcing decisions that made perfect sense at that time. But whenever you work in corporate, you know that you set up a strategy for 3-5 years, and every 3 and 5 years you review that and adjust if needed. And of course, outsourcing as a practice across the business, there are many, many examples in the news and literature when you can say where things that actually have gone really, really wrong, right? This example was really relevant probably 3 years ago, but you all have seen the light rail that's in Sydney right now. I don't know if that actually has been settled, but that has been one of the best examples in the last couple of years of a really bad outsourcing decision where the New South Wales government decided to hire this Spanish company called Acciona to build the light rail and decided to use outsourcing as a project. So they defined, guys, I want you to build the light rail between this area and this area. I want you to build 5 or 10 stations, and here's the specs, go and do it. The problem in this case is that New South Wales Transport was not really clear about the requirements up front. So what happened is that the provider, Acciona, as they went through this whole process of building the light rail, they realized that New South Wales kept changing the requirements, keep changing the objectives all the time. They didn't give all the information, all the right information up front. So whatever they decided to charge at the beginning, the quote actually doubled, I think even triple of the original estimates. And now they're going up to the courts to iterate this bill of 1.2 billion or thereabouts. So you can see when you outsource, the key thing, it's always about communication between the customer and the provider. And it might come in the way of setting the right objectives, expectations, and scope. Being really clear that once you outsource something to a provider, you also delegating the management of the day-to-day management activities. So if you pay Microsoft to provide your email to you, don't go to Microsoft and tell them how they need to do it. They already have their own way, they already have their own model, and just let them follow them through. Another typical issue in outsourcing is that conflict of interest. As I said before, the provider is trying to make money and you're trying to save money. So there might always be a bit of attention in that area. Contracts, perfect example where I was talking about the light rail. Contracts are the complete science and profession in itself. Lawyers and even IT professionals specialize in outsourcing contracts. It could be really complex and you really to the letter. And the last part is that today, when you outsource, you're probably going to be outsourced and working with multiple providers for different things. Quite often, these providers might need to be coordinated, and it's often up to you, the customer, to do that coordination, and you might need to do a little bit of blame shifting between different providers when something goes wrong. Oh, I think 42 minutes actually made my goal, so I'll leave it up for questions. Thank you for putting attention, and just let me know if you have any questions right now.
So, Felipe, thank you. I might see whether or not anyone would like to turn their microphone off and ask a question. If you do, feel free to do that. But whilst I wait to see if anyone's brave enough to ask, I might just kind of make some observations. There's been an interesting kind of both some questions in the chat channel.
I was just running through all of them.
There's also a very kind of detailed discussion around the nature of outsourcing and debates about whether certain things are outsourcing, etc. And I think part of the challenge is that people are seeing it as something that's monolithic. And so one of the key elements in that, I think, is that you can outsource different elements.
Yep, sorry, go.
Oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to start to answer one of the questions, but you go first, and then I'll go through the list.
No. If there's a question there that you'd like to answer.
So, Yunfu Shi, and apologies, I'm probably butchering that name. Welcome to my world. Does software as a service count as outsourcing to some extent?
That's exactly the one I was going to ask you.
That's an awesome question, and it does. And actually, I actually had a slide because that question comes quite often. You'll be surprised, right? So yes, because when you are doing software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, all these models of cloud computing, what you basically are doing is that you're outsourcing the management of your infrastructure, of your software, of your platform, right? So it is a way of outsourcing where you just shift all the responsibilities to an external provider. What people often get lost in is that, let's say if you're going to Amazon today, a lot of the extra services that go around Amazon AWS, for example, your security, your application support, your customer support, might not be included in the contract. So I don't consider that infrastructure as a service is a managed service arrangement, but it's definitely an outsourcing arrangement where you actually ask someone, please just provide me with a infrastructure on a per use per month basis, and that's it. So it definitely is. I would just be careful that managed services normally, and this is like a really, really thin line. I have to read a lot about it to make the distinction. When people talk about managed services, they talk about cloud plus some extra additional support things. But cloud computing in itself, it is an outsourcing arrangement.
Can I ask you a question, Felipe?
Sure.
Early on, you talked about one of the challenges of outsourcing as being a loss of control, or at least a perception of a loss of control in some cases. And often that's attempted to be handled through putting in place SLAs. Do you think that's an effective service level agreements? Do you think that's an effective mechanism?
I would say it's a basic mechanism. And I would say that's something that has to be in every single contract or arrangement with a service provider, but it's not complete mechanism to manage quality and control, right? I've seen many, many examples in many companies in Australia overseas where you have service level agreements in place, and those are actually being met on a month per month basis, but you're still getting like a really bad outcome, right? Because SLAs are normally metrics, right? Oh, my SLA might be that I only have any one incident per month as a maximum, which could be really good. But if, let's say, the performance of the service is really slow at the peak times, that might not be an incident. So it might not be failing the SLA, but you're still not getting like the right outcome, right? So my experience, what I see it actually works really well is have your SLAs as your basis, but often have these sort of management meetings with the provider where you review on a month per month basis. You review your SLAs, but then you go to the next section. Any other issues, any other things that are not working out for you, let's talk about it and let's keep this communication open, right?
Yeah.
So that's all about really vendor management, and there's a whole practice in itself about how do you manage vendors on top of the SLAs.
Can I then ask a different question?
Sure.
I love the slide you had up and the discussion around it about your food preparation at home, and then the different models, kind of the analogies that you had there. I think that captured that one. That captured it fantastically well. The bottom one, staff augmentation. You hire a chef to come home and cook for you. sounds like a fantastic way of getting scalability and filling in gaps and getting in good expertise that you don't need all the time at home. Do you run into a problem where the chef comes into your home, but he can't find anything because he doesn't know where your tools are, where your pots, which cupboard your pots are in, and how hot your oven gets? He hasn't calibrated it. So
absolutely. And when you're talking about staff augmentation, that's kind of the key issue, right? So you can have the best resources in the market coming into your company, but if you don't have the right environment or the right tools for them to do the job, it's quite often that they're going to fail on the task, right?
Well, they just don't understand the culture of your company.
Yeah, they don't understand the culture of your company. They're not a really good fit. They don't have the tools, or they might be doing something missing in them. It's not going to work, right? And we need to be really careful, because staff augmentation really brings, you bring a person to your company and you manage what they're doing, right? They bring the knowledge and the skill set. So I bring the chef because he knows how to cook, right? But if I tell him to cook lasagna today and I just give you like a really cheap beef mince and really cheap pasta, and the lasagna is not going to be good, well, that's on me, because that's what I provide him to do, right? Or if I told them, go and make lasagna, and he makes lasagna under what he thinks is the best lasagna, and I'm actually vegetarian, and I never said that at the beginning, that's also going to be an issue, and it's about how I manage that new resource, right?
Yeah.
It's easy with a chef. When you go into IT, it becomes a little bit more complex about technicalities, but that's a kind of key message. You manage a resource.
Yep, fantastic. Did anyone have a final question I'd like to ask Felipe? I think it's often a little bit difficult with 250 people online for.
Yeah, so I'm running
to put their hand up.
I'm ready for the discussion, and there's some really, really good discussions in here. So I'm sorry I didn't see this through before. Some people prefer Woolworths and Coles shipping service more. I completely agree. I tried HelloFresh before, not the best one. Wouldn't purchasing any sort of software be outsourcing, since the alternative is to build the software yourself in-house? That's a great question. Not really, because when you buy the software, in a way, you're buying an asset. It's not really something particular. It could be different. Let's say if you were to hire someone to make you like a bespoke software to your to your own sort of needs, besides buying something off the shelf, right? Buying that software in itself is not really outsourcing. What it would be outsourcing if you get someone other company to do the implementation for you into your company and do the configuration and the setup, right? But if you just go and buy the software, yeah, well, you could build it yourself, but we're talking about different layers of insourcing in here, right? It's going back to the example about the Italian restaurant. Yeah, you're making the food, but you could buy, for example, I don't know, the marinara pasta from another company. That doesn't mean you're outsourcing that. You just buy like an asset, and how you do with that is really like you're insourcing and outsourcing arrangement. And it's a good question though, but normally buying assets is not considered as an outsourcing.
Yeah. We probably need to let you go and see your family and have some dinner if you haven't already.
No, it's all good. Sorry, I can appreciate the comments on the chat. I'm just reading them through now. There's some really good answers about the software. So if an outsourced service causing users such data loss, who will take responsibility for it? That's a great question. If you outsource a service and there's some sort of issues with that and some data loss, you normally go and change. So ultimately, who is responsible for the customer data? It's yourself, your company, right? Because the customer provides you the data to you. And from that point of view, you are the one doing the service and doing all that needs to be done. If then you decided to outsource a part to another company and they miss the data and do all of that, yeah, you can blame them and get enough penalty and whatnot. But at the end of the day, even though you outsource something, you're still accountable. And I think that's the key difference between outsourcing, is that being accountable for something versus being responsible for doing something, right? I can be accountable for providing food to my family, but I'm not maybe responsible because I decide to hire a chef, right? If the chef messes up, yeah, guess who's going to be blamed for it? Myself, and then I'll blame the chef for my return.
Yep. Great. Well, thank you, Felipe. That's been fantastic.
No
We
worries.
promised to let you move on. The one bit I dislike most about these sorts of talks is that you can't get it's very hard to get a kind of a rousing round of applause at the end of it.
No worries. I'm getting some thanks on the chat, so that I appreciate that, and hope we can.
I'm sure everyone has appreciated what you've said. I noticed earlier on in the chat there were a couple of people who said, this is fantastic. It's kind of the, and certainly in previous years always, it's the guest presentations that I think give that kind of coal-face real view of how things are that the students absolutely love the most. And I can see a whole lot of thanks now appearing in the chat window. Thank you very much. That's been fantastic. Oh, actually, sorry, one quick question. A number of the students asked whether or not those slides that you were using, whether they would be available.
Yeah, I'll send the slides. There's nothing confidential on the slides, so happy to share them.
Fantastic. Great. Oh, well, thank you, Felipe. That's been great.
Cheers, guys. Have a good night.
Great.
All right.
Okay, everyone. Just before we wrap up for the evening, there's a couple of quick things I wanted, just a few quick admin things before we wind up. So let me just share my screen again, bring this up. The first thing is around GatherTown. I noticed just a very quick update on that. Some students indicated, I asked the question on Ed. Some students said they loved it. It made it feel much more interactive and a lot more like a normal face-to-face class. And so I think functionally it was great. The problem is that some students found it to be really laggy and with poor audio. And I know at least one of the tutors switched to Zoom earlier today because of that. What I would like to do over the next couple of days is experiment and see whether a hybrid might be possible. So in other words, it might be feasible to open up Zoom and use that for the tutorial session with the tutor, but also stay logged into GatherTown. So if you're doing small group interactions, you can switch into that and create your have your chats with 4 students around a table type thing. I'll explore that. I'll also talk to the tutors about it and then e-ask, there's a typo there, and then ask the tutors to talk with each of their tutorial groups about their preference and whether to switch back to Zoom or to try a hybrid or whether to stay with GatherTown. I think if there's even a couple of students in a tutorial who are really struggling because of the audio, in particular in GatherTown, then it probably does make sense to switch. But we'll experiment, I'll explore that and then we'll sort something out before the class next week. Groups, hopefully, or your project teams, hopefully now you've started to do that. I know some people have already found groups. They're starting to form. Some of you probably are still struggling. I have now created on Canvas under people, you can see the screen grab on the right, a session where there is a set of project teams. There's essentially 10 for each tutorial class, and there's 10 tutorial classes. So there's 120 of those groups there. You can add yourself to those. So if you know who your team is, then coordinate with each other and add yourselves to the same team. Find a new group that doesn't have any students in it and add the 4 of you to it, so that you've then got a group and we'll know that that's your group. Be careful to only add yourself to a project team for your tutorial. If you add yourself to a project team not in your tutorial, then I will come in and remove you and add you randomly to a group in your own tutorial. So make sure that you're only forming groups with students in your tutorial, and the groups are limited to 4. If you want a group of 5, talk to you, for whatever reason, talk to your tutor, and they'll just, if they approve it, then they'll change the group on Canvas to allow it to go have 5 members rather than 4. But they will only do it provided you acknowledge that if there are some groups that are only 2 students, and we need another member to get it to at least 3, someone in your group of 5 might have to transfer, and we may require that. So they'll let you be 5, but only under that agreement. If you aren't in a group, you can find a group of 3 and add yourself to it. If you and so by the end of this week, everyone should be able to add themselves to those groups. Over the end of this week, over the weekend, I'll lock down any further changes, and anyone who's not in a group, I'll then allocate you so that you can, that you will be in a group. So I'll find groups that are only 2 or 3 and add you as the 4th member or whatever. And if I find like 2 groups of 2, I'll merge you. So if you've got one other person you want to be in a group with and you don't care who the others are, put the 2 of you into a group and then let others add themselves, or I'll add people to it. So by beginning of next week, we should have all of the project groups sorted out. So that was the only last key bit of admin, and then so key 3 things to remember. Reminders: 1, add yourself to one of those teams on Canvas. 2, make sure you check Ed regularly. I've had some people emailing me ask me questions, and my response has been, I've already answered that on Ed. Go and have a look there. And the third reminder is that quiz 2 will be next week. Now that you've had a go at it, you should be more comfortable with it. I noticed I haven't had a chance to read yet, obviously, because I've been in this class, but I've noticed that I've had an email from at least some students about issues with the quiz. Doesn't look like there are too many, but I'll have a look at those and I'll get back to you and work out where we go, or if there are any issues. So I'll follow up on those after the class. That was essentially it for the week. Let me just cancel my screen sharing. Check the chat to see if there's anything crucial. I can see some people saying a hybrid might work. Out of town's good. Audio is a problem.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Rand.
Do you mind I just ask you a quick question? Sorry about that.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question about the project 8.
Yep.
Like,
Yes.
we gonna choose organization and the technology, yeah?
Yes.
I'm
So
just wondering the technology, is that has to be like the current existing one, or can we just thinking about something new?
It needs to be something realistic. So, but it can be a very new technology. So, for example, you might say, I think I gave an example somewhere saying a supermarket chain might be your company. So for those of you who live in Australia, you'd be very familiar with Woolworths. They're a big supermarket.
Yep.
And they might say, we want to investigate the use of augmented reality. So when people come into the shop, we give them a AR headset. So as they wander around, it gives them information.
Yep.
Or we might want to investigate the use of Bluetooth location beacons so that we can track where people are in the shop and, etc. So it can be an existing technology that's well established, but they don't use yet.
Yep.
Or it could be a new technology, a relatively new one. Essentially, it needs to be the key decision is a company that you can find out enough about to kind of understand them and how they work and what changes might apply and what their value chains are, so what their business is. And the technology needs to be something that you can see would potentially be of use to them in changing some aspect of their business in a way that adds value.
Yeah. So basically, you are thinking maybe add a new technology for them, or just maybe updating one of the old systems.
Yeah, that's right. So it might be something that they already do, but not in an effective way. And so they're looking at how they leverage, how they update it with a new technology, new to them rather than really cutting edge.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Not a problem. It's 9 o'clock. I probably should wrap up. If you have other questions, feel free to post them on Ed. I've been tracking that and the answers have been coming up fairly quickly. And other than that, thank you all. I hope you found Felipe's talk fascinating. I certainly did. I think those kind of are always one of the best parts of this subject, the talk from our guest presenters. And I'll see you all next week. So thank you and good evening.